The shotgun blast echoed through the empty valley before the sun had fully risen. It wasn't fired at anything. Franklin Cole just needed to hear something louder than the silence in his head. Smoke drifted from the barrel caught in the amber light creeping through the kitchen window. The echo died somewhere deep in the Blue Ridge, leaving him alone again, with the cold, the unpaid bills, and the old dog staring at him like a ghost who'd seen too much. Ghost, his 11-year-old German shepherd, didn't flinch. The dog had been there through worse. Martha's long nights of coughing the funeral. No one stayed for the slow unraveling of everything Franklin once thought unbreakable. Now, the old Marine sat at his scarred oak table, hands shaking slightly, as he broke open the shotgun, checked the empty shells, and set it aside. On the table lay a neat pile of envelopes, red-stamped final notices, urgent reminders of how little time he had left. He rubbed his eyes. "You ever seen a man outlast his own usefulness, boy?" he asked. Ghost tilted his head, amber eyes steady, patient. Franklin smiled bitterly. "Didn't think so." He reached for his coffee cold. The heating oil tank had been dry for a week. The old farmhouse that Martha had loved was freezing now, as if her warmth had left with her. He'd promised her he'd keep it. "Keep the family together, Frank. Don't let them drift." She'd said that in her final hour, her hand weak but steady in his. He had promised. And like every promise that mattered, he had failed. He glanced again at the phone mounted on the wall. A relic like him. It had been years since he'd called his children, years since they'd answered without checking their watches. Still, he knew this was the day. The red stamps didn't lie. The bank had given him 2 weeks. The insurance was gone. The last of Martha's savings had evaporated into hospital bills. He'd sold his truck once before to pay for her oxygen. Bought it back after she died, because what else did he have to drive away from? He stared at the phone for a long moment, then said aloud, "A Marine doesn't beg." But the house creaked in the wind like it was arguing otherwise. He picked up the receiver anyway. The dial tone buzzed cold and judgmental. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the numbers. Then he sighed. Hell with it. The call connected after 2 rings. "Dad." A voice answered, smooth, polished, impatient. "Max." Franklin's throat felt raw. "I need you to come by. Bring your brother and sister. There's a family matter." A pause. "Family matter," Max repeated like the phrase was foreign. "Yes, today." "Dad, it's a 3-hour drive." "I know." The line was silent for a beat. Then reluctantly, "Fine. I'll tell them." Franklin hung up before he could lose his nerve. Ghost was watching him from the kitchen doorway, tail twitching slightly. "You'd think they'd come without being told," Franklin muttered. "But I guess I trained them too damn well to keep moving." He pushed himself up, joints aching. Outside, the wind carried a bite that smelled like snow. The old oak tree Martha had planted 45 years ago stood bare in the yard, its roots cracking the walkway. Beneath it, the patch of frozen soil where he'd buried her favorite roses lay dusted with frost. He looked down at Ghost. "They'll come," he said quietly. "They always come when there's something to take." 3 hours later, the gravel driveway filled with the crunch of expensive tires. First came the black Mercedes, Max's, of course. Next, a white Range Rover gliding up like it didn't want to touch the dirt. Then a blue Audi bringing up the rear. The sight almost made Franklin laugh. He remembered when those same 3 kids used to fight over who got to ride in the front seat of his rust-red Ford. Now they looked like they'd arrived from another planet. Max stepped out first, dark suit, immaculate hair, perfect even in the wind. His eyes scanned the house as if appraising it for resale before they even spoke. Behind him came Clara, wrapped in beige cashmere, smelling faintly of perfume and Manhattan distance. And finally, Jacob, the youngest, hands in his pockets, trying not to look anyone in the eye. "Dad," Max said, voice clipped polite. "You look good." Franklin grunted. "You always were a bad liar." They followed him inside, boots tapping across the wooden floor Martha had once waxed every Sunday morning. The house was smaller than they remembered, or maybe they were just bigger now, swollen with money and worry. In the living room, Franklin laid the stack of envelopes on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "These came this week," he said. "Your mother's medical bills. The bank's ready to foreclose." Clara gasped softly, hand over her mouth. Jacob blinked. Max just nodded, calm and controlled, like he'd already known. "I'm aware," Max said finally, "which is why I've already taken care of it." Franklin frowned. "You paid them, in a manner of speaking." Max opened his briefcase, sliding a document forward. "I bought the debt. The loan is now under my company's name." For a long moment, Franklin didn't understand. Then he did. His face drained of color. "You what? It's the best solution," Max continued. "We've got a buyer lined up, a developer out of Charlotte. They'll pay above market. You'll clear the debt, and you'll have a place to live." Clara found the deed for the old family cabin up in Ashe County, still in the family name, perfect for retirement. Franklin stared at them one by one. Clara smiled a brittle, rehearsed smile. Jacob looked at the floor. He said quietly, "This isn't just a house, Max. This is your mother's soul nailed into the walls." The words hung heavy in the air. Clara's eyes flickered, but Max didn't blink. "It's also a depreciating asset," he said flatly. Something inside Franklin snapped. "You cold-blooded little bastard," he whispered. "You sold your mother's memory like a stock portfolio." "Dad." "No. Don't you dad me. I fought wars to build this home. Bled to make sure you never had to. And you—" He pointed at Max, then Clara, then Jacob. "You call this helping? You're just cleaning up the mess you made, being too proud to call your old man before the bank did." Clara's eyes welled, but she said nothing. Max straightened his tie. "It's done. The movers will be here next week. The keys to the cabin will be delivered tomorrow." They left not long after engines humming down the road, until the only sound left was the rustle of the oak tree outside and the low whine in Ghost's throat. Franklin stood in the doorway, watching the last trace of dust settle. The house felt smaller now, emptier. He whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Martha. I made them strong enough to win, but not kind enough to love." Ghost nudged his leg, gently pressing his weight against Franklin's thigh. The man reached down, fingers sinking into the thick fur behind the dog's ears. "Guess it's just you and me again, soldier." He poured himself a finger of the cheap bourbon Max had once called gasoline and sat by the window. Outside, dusk fell like a curtain over the fields. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed a lonely sound. Franklin raised his glass toward the fading light. "To promises I couldn't keep." Ghost barked once, sharp and sudden, and turned his head toward the distant hills. Franklin followed his gaze north toward the ridgeline that shadowed the horizon, the land his father used to talk about, the cabin no one had seen in 50 years. "You really think we should go back?" he asked softly. Ghost wagged his tail once as if answering. Franklin exhaled. "All right then. One last march." He stood crossing the quiet house for the final time. He took down Martha's framed photo from the mantel, set it gently in a cedar chest, along with a folded Marine Corps flag, a few medals, and his old service journal. When the last light slipped through the curtains, Franklin turned off the lamp and looked at the dark reflection of himself in the window. A ghost of a man standing beside his dog, surrounded by the bones of what once was a home. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying a faint scent of pine and snow from the north. He placed a hand on Ghost's head and said, "Pack up, boy. We're going home." The wind cut through the windshield like a blade, even with the heat turned up as high as Franklin's old truck would allow. Ghost lay curled on the seat beside him, head resting on a blanket that still faintly smelled of Martha's perfume. The dog hadn't made a sound since they left West Jefferson behind, just watched the passing trees like he knew where they were going and maybe even why. The tires crunched against gravel as the road narrowed, winding deeper into the wooded veins of the Appalachian foothills. Fog curled low across the bends, thick as smoke and just as hard to shake. Every mile deeper into Ashe County felt like a step backward in time. The houses became fewer. The woods became thicker. Franklin's shoulders stayed tight, eyes alert. He didn't trust this road never had. "Your grandfather built half of this road by hand," he muttered more to himself than to Ghost. "Dynamite and a damned shovel." Man didn't believe in shortcuts or permits. The truck rattled as it hit a deep pothole. Franklin cursed under his breath and gripped the wheel harder. Ghost lifted his head but didn't make a sound. Just after the 7th switchback, Franklin saw it, the rusted iron sign hanging by one hinge with the barely visible words, "Coles Hollow." He slowed to a crawl and turned off the main road tires, spitting mud. Ghost stood up, tail twitching. He pawed at the window like he recognized the place. Franklin noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You don't bury a legacy son," he said softly, eyes locked on the dirt road unraveling before them. "You just forget where you put it." The woods swallowed the truck whole. It took another 30 minutes to reach the clearing. Franklin parked beside the old well, now dry and half-collapsed. The cabin stood ahead, sagging under its own weight, like an old man too tired to stand straight. Vines had grown wild over the porch. The chimney leaned like it had taken a punch, and half the roof was caved in from rot or snow or time, probably all three. "Well," Franklin said, stepping out and stretching his back until it cracked, "at least it ain't in pieces." Ghost jumped down beside him and immediately began sniffing the ground, pacing in tight circles like he remembered something. Franklin took a slow walk around the property, boots sinking into patches of damp earth and brittle leaves. The barn, if you could still call it that, was nothing more than splinters nailed together by memory. Most of the roof was gone. The walls bowed inward. But something in his chest stirred. Maybe it was the smell of pine or the crunch of gravel under his boots, or just the feeling of being away from everything that had disappointed him. The mountain had a way of letting you forget you ever needed anything beyond what you could hold in your hands. Still, it was a far cry from a home. He'd need to patch the roof before the snow came, fix the chimney if he wanted heat, and somehow get clean water running. There was no cell signal up here, no neighbors within shouting distance, no modern conveniences, which in a strange way made it feel more like home than the house his kids had just evicted him from. He grabbed a crowbar from the truck and went to the front door. The hinges screamed as he pushed it open. Inside the cabin smelled of mildew, wet wood, and dead time. A mouse skittered across the floor and vanished behind the hearth. Dust coated everything. He ran a hand along the mantel, left a trail clean enough to see the scars in the wood underneath. He dropped his bag and turned in a slow circle. The fireplace was cracked but fixable. The wood stove would work with a good cleaning. The back room might serve as a sleeping space if the ceiling held. It wasn't much, but it was his. Ghost entered behind him and went straight to the far corner of the cabin. He sat ears up, watching something Franklin couldn't see. "You find something?" Franklin asked. Ghost didn't move. The dog remained on alert even as Franklin started unloading the essentials, bedding, canned food, a bottle of cheap bourbon tools, Martha's picture. He placed her photo on the mantel, wiped the glass gently, and stared into her eyes. "I made it Han," he said. "Not exactly a castle, but it'll do." That night, he cooked a can of beans over the wood stove and watched the shadows dance against the walls. Ghost sat by the door, ears twitching every time the wind changed direction. Franklin sipped his bourbon and stared into the fire. "Funny," he said out loud. "I used to think I'd die in that farmhouse. Thought maybe the kids'd bury me next to you. Now look at me. Back in a place I haven't seen since before Max learned to shave." The fire popped and Ghost growled low in his throat. Franklin stood frowning and followed the dog to the window. Outside in the clearing near the barn, the wind had picked up. He saw nothing. Still, the dog stayed tense, tail stiff. "Easy, boy. Ain't nothing out there but ghosts." He paused. "Guess that's the point." The wind howled louder that night, scraping against the walls like fingers trying to claw their way inside. Franklin laid on the old cot, fully dressed, shotgun within reach. Ghost paced until exhaustion took him curling up near the hearth. Somewhere in the night, Franklin dreamed of his father's voice, rough like gravel and smoke. In the dream, they were digging together behind the barn, unearthing something long buried. "You never bury a legacy," his father said. "You just forget where you put it." When Franklin woke, sweat cold on his back, Ghost was already at the door, whining, pawing, tail stiff. Light had barely broken, but the dog was urgent more than usual. Franklin pulled on his coat and followed Ghost into the yard. The dog beelined to the edge of the collapsed barn, sniffing frantically, then began digging furiously, claws tearing into the soft dirt. Dust flew. Franklin watched, heart thudding. "You bleeding for dirt, Ghost," he muttered, stepping closer. "What the hell are you trying to show me?" Ghost kept digging, paws, raw muzzle caked with mud. Something was under there. Something old. Something waiting. And Franklin, despite the ache in his bones and the skepticism in his heart, couldn't help but grab a shovel and dig alongside him. They didn't stop until metal struck wood. A hollow sound echoed beneath them. Franklin stood back, breath heavy, staring at the dark soil as if it had just spoken. Ghost barked once, sharp and certain. Franklin whispered, "Goddamn time machine." He looked toward the sun rising through the misty trees and knew deep in his gut they hadn't just unearthed something. They'd awakened it. The next morning brought a light frost and a sky the color of old bones. Franklin stood over the half-dug hole beside the barn, breath rising in the chill like smoke. His hands were cracked from yesterday's digging joints, stiff from sleeping on a cot that had no business supporting a man in his 70s. But his eyes were clear, focused. Ghost waited beside him, tail still and steady like a soldier at post. Franklin stared down at the patch of wood they'd uncovered, aged, dark, swollen from years underground. A trap door, most likely with iron hinges nearly rusted through. Just looking at it gave him a strange pressure in his chest. Not fear exactly. Not anticipation either. Something heavier. He took a breath and muttered, "Let's see what all the fuss is about, boy." The crowbar gave resistance at first, then a sudden crack as the frame gave way. The smell hit them instantly, earth dust, wood rot, and something deeper. Ghost didn't flinch. Instead, he backed up, then trotted in a circle, pacing like he was preparing for something. Franklin shined his flashlight into the black opening. Wooden stairs descended into shadow. Carefully, he stepped down, boots creaking light, sweeping side to side. The air was damp and still. As he reached the bottom, the beam revealed the room's stone walls, shelves lined with dusty jars, and in the center, the unmistakable bulk of a copper still tarnished but intact. He turned slowly in a circle. Wooden racks held rows of old bottles, some broken, some sealed tight with wax. A crate sat in the far corner with faded lettering, Cole Spirits. Property of Joseph Cole, 1932. His breath caught. "You're bleeding for dirt, Ghost," he whispered, even though the dog hadn't come down yet. "What the hell are you trying to show me?" He ran his hand along one of the barrels. His fingers came away coated in dust and something sticky, aged whiskey maybe. The kind that soaked through the wood and never fully dried. He pulled a pocket knife, pried a cork from a smaller barrel, and caught a few drops in the lid of an old jar. He sniffed. It hit him like a memory oak smoke, something sweet like sorghum, something sharp like flint. He sipped, and everything stopped. The burn was smooth and low like a distant fire just catching. It traveled down his throat with a warmth that didn't just heat, it comforted. Like stepping into a place that recognized you. Like hearing your own name spoken by someone long gone. He sank down onto a wooden crate, blinking. "This ain't shine," he murmured. This is legacy." Ghost barked from above. Franklin climbed the stairs slowly, carefully placing the trap door back into place and covering it with an old tarp from the barn. No need to advertise what they'd found, not yet. Not until he understood it. Back inside the cabin, he poured water into the kettle and stood at the stove, still tasting the whiskey in his mouth, still seeing his grandfather's rough hands in his mind, working the still, checking the barrels, scribbling notes in that thick, leather-bound journal he always carried. And then it hit him. The journal. Franklin rushed back down the stairs to the cellar flashlight bouncing across the walls. He searched the shelves, the corners, every crate, until finally he found it in a metal lockbox buried beneath 2 rotted sacks of cornmeal. The journal was there wrapped in oilcloth, remarkably well preserved. On the front, Joseph Cole, 1927 to 1933. He carried it upstairs like it was a newborn child. For hours, Franklin sat at the kitchen table, Ghost at his feet, as he flipped through the pages. Hand-drawn schematics of the still. Fermentation logs, grain combinations, notes on temperature, and woven between all the technical data reflections. Thoughts about the land, about the law closing in during Prohibition, about hiding the last great batch where no one would find it. 12 barrels made to outlast time, his grandfather had written. Brewed slow, aged in stillness. For the day when a Cole might need more than money. Franklin sat back, stunned. "Jesus," he said. "You left this for me, didn't you, old man?" The next day was spent cleaning the cabin. He patched the fireplace flue, tightened up the shutters, and fixed the lock on the front door. Every few hours, he'd catch Ghost staring toward the barn again, ears perked. The dog was restless, even at peace. Franklin understood. Once you stirred up the past, it didn't go back to sleep easy. In the afternoon, he returned to the trap door, opened it again, and descended with a legal pad and pen. He took inventory. There were 9 sealed barrels, 2 cracked and 1 half full. Enough to start something if he had the courage. Later that evening, Franklin built a fire in the stove and sat on the porch with Ghost. The sky was bleeding red behind the mountains, the first stars blinking into place. "You know," he said, voice gravel low, "this isn't just whiskey, Ghost. This is poetry in a bottle." The dog wagged his tail as if in agreement. Franklin stared out at the fading light. For the first time in years, his mind didn't feel like it was spiraling. It was focused, driven. But he also knew he couldn't do this alone. He'd need tools, supplies, legal advice, and maybe someone who still knew the old ways of distilling without blowing yourself up, which meant heading back into town. He sighed. Tomorrow we make contact. Ghost barked once. Franklin nodded. Yeah, you're right. Time to bring the outside in. But just as he stood to head back inside, a crunch of gravel echoed from the edge of the property. Ghost snapped to attention, growling low in his throat. Franklin froze, eyes narrowing. Headlights appeared through the trees, soft and slow. Someone else was here. Someone who knew how to find Cole's Hollow. He stepped off the porch, hand brushing the grip of the revolver at his hip. The truck that emerged from the tree line was ancient, an old International harvester painted matte green and held together with wire and history. The door creaked open, and a wiry man stepped out, bearded, wind-chapped, with a pipe between his teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, squinting toward Franklin. "You look just like your daddy did when he found that still the first time." Franklin blinked. "Eli." The old man nodded. "Ain't seen you since you were knee-high to a corncob. Heard you was back. Figured I'd stop by before word spreads too far." Franklin tilted his head. Word about what? Eli grinned through broken teeth. "About the smell." He tapped his nose and winked. Franklin chuckled despite himself. "Come inside," he said. "You might want to sit down for this." The first light of morning filtered through the grimy cabin windows, catching dust motes as they danced slowly in the silence. Franklin stood by the stove, pouring boiling water over 2 chipped mugs of instant coffee. Outside, the mountain breathed mist into the trees, the kind of stillness that made time stretch thin. Eli Booker sat at the table rolling a cigarette with hands that looked like they were carved from tree bark. He hadn't changed much, still lean still, sharp-eyed, still smelling faintly of wood smoke and tobacco. Ghost lay under the table, relaxed but watchful, one ear soon tilted toward the barn. "You still drink it black?" Eli Franklin asked, placing the mug in front of him. "I ain't never trusted sugar in my coffee. Makes the world taste too sweet." He took a sip, then fixed his eyes on Franklin. "You gonna show me or just let me guess?" Franklin nodded once. No more dancing around it. He led Eli outside, boots crunching frost-covered leaves, over to the barn, where the tarp still covered the hole. He pulled it back and opened the trap door. The cold breath of earth rose up to greet them. Eli leaned over the edge and whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. You weren't just whistling Dixie last night." Franklin grabbed the lantern and descended, first Ghost following, then Eli. The cellar looked just as it had the day before, still forgotten, almost sacred in its untouched quiet. "This ain't a hole in the ground," Eli muttered, stepping onto the dirt floor. "It's a goddamn time machine." Franklin let the words hang in the air. Somehow they felt exactly right. He lit a few oil lamps along the stone wall. The copper still gleamed dully under the glow, and the barrels cast long shadows across the shelves. Eli walked around, slowly running his fingers across the aging wood, checking the coils, the seams, the welds. "Jesus," he said, squatting beside the still. "This thing's original. No rebuilds. This right here's your granddaddy's signature. See that mark? Nobody etched like Joseph Cole." Franklin handed him the journal. Eli flipped through it with reverence, nodding as he read. He knew his stuff. Low heat, long cook, no shortcuts. Ain't nobody does it this way anymore. Takes patience. "That's what scares me," Franklin said quietly. "The patience." Eli looked up at him. "You found something worth waiting for." They spent the morning cataloging the barrels, checking seals, measuring what could be salvaged. Eli tapped the side of one barrel and grinned. "This one's singing." You can hear it, can't you? Just humming in there like it knows someone finally came back. Franklin crouched beside him. Think it's good? I think it might be the best damn whiskey in these mountains. If it ain't, it's close. They hauled one barrel upstairs, muscles aching from the effort. Franklin fetched 2 glasses. He poured carefully, reverently. The liquid shone amber in the morning light, deep and gold and glowing like memory. They drank in silence. Eli wiped his mouth. It's got teeth and honey. A man could start a war or end one with this. Franklin laughed softly. Or buy back time. But beneath the surface of their conversation, a current moved one of purpose of questions neither of them was quite ready to ask. After lunch, they sat on the porch. Eli lit his cigarette and leaned back. You thinking of selling it? He asked finally. Franklin exhaled. Didn't come up here to start a business. Hell, I came up here to disappear. Don't look like that's what happened. Franklin stared out at the trees. What if this place still remembers what it was? What if this whiskey isn't just about heritage? What if it's about redemption? Eli gave him a look. Redemption ain't worth a damn unless you share it. Franklin nodded slowly. Later that evening, Franklin brought out Martha's photo, setting it on the table next to a bottle they'd just uncorked. Ghost curled at his feet, eyes half closed. I ever tell you she hated this cabin, he said, not looking at Eli. Said it felt like a graveyard. Maybe it was. Until now. They drank in silence again, this time slower. Less for taste, more for memory. Then Eli leaned forward. I know a fella. Hardware guy in Harmony Creek. Used to run stills himself till the feds shut him down. Straightened out now. Name's Ethan Walker. Trustworthy. Franklin raised an eyebrow. And he's got a lawyer friend. Knows how to make things clean. You want to sell this legally private estate release licensing the works they can help. Franklin considered that. You tell them I'm not interested in making it big, he said. No factories, no gimmicks. Then you better make it loud and rare. Let the whiskey speak for itself. Ghost sat up suddenly, ears pricked toward the tree line. What is it, boy? Franklin asked, getting to his feet. They all listened. For a long moment, nothing but wind. Then quiet footsteps in the leaves. Just one set. Deliberate. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a woman in her 30s wearing a denim jacket and carrying a sketchbook under one arm. Eli grinned. Speak of the devil. Franklin squinted. Friend of yours, she walked up the porch steps like she belonged there. You must be Franklin, she said, her voice low, steady. I'm Nina Rainwater. Ethan sent me. Franklin glanced at Eli. You move fast. Eli chuckled. Didn't have to. She was already on the mountain. Nina looked down at Ghost, who stared at her for a second, then gave a soft bark. Well, at least the dog approves, she said. Ethan says you've got something special here. He's right. Franklin didn't answer immediately. Nina stepped closer, flipping her sketchbook open. Before I saw it, I drew it. This morning, in fact. She showed him a pencil drawing, rough but powerful. A bottle half buried in earth with a dog standing guard over it. Above it, Ghost's Reserve. Below, aged in silence. Bottled in honor. Franklin stared at it. That's a hell of a label, he said, voice rough. I didn't come up with the name, she said. He did. She nodded toward Ghost. He's the real story, isn't he? Franklin looked down at the dog, then back at the drawing. Yeah, he said softly. He is. Eli slapped his knee. Well, hell, looks like the past just hired marketing. Franklin gave a small laugh, the kind that felt strange in his chest. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do this." Small, honest, no suits, no investors, just mountain soul. Nina smiled. "Then we start with 6 bottles, no more." Franklin nodded. 6 bottles, he echoed, and a story worth drinking. The cabin had never smelled like this before, not in Franklin's memory, not even in the stories his father told when bourbon had loosened his tongue. That morning, it was all rich oak vanilla charred sugar and the faint burn of history. 6 bottles lined the counter, each filled corked, wax-sealed, and labeled by hand. Nina's design, Ghost's Reserve, aged in silence, bottled in honor, was simple and bold, printed on rough parchment that made every bottle feel like an artifact instead of a product. Franklin ran his fingers down the side of the first bottle. "You realize," he said, eyes locked on the label, "this ain't just whiskey, it's a declaration of war." Eli grunted behind him, tightening the straps on the crate that would hold the bottles. A war against what exactly? Franklin turned his voice quiet. Against forgetting. Outside, the wind rolled down from the ridge like a slow exhale. The cold was setting in early this year, and with it came a restlessness in Franklin's chest he hadn't felt since his deployment. Not fear, just the knowledge that once a thing leaves your hands, it ain't yours anymore. They loaded the crate into the back of Eli's truck. Nina handed Franklin a list: a few boutique bars in Asheville, 2 specialty shops that sold rare spirits, and 1 high-end restaurant known for featuring Appalachian stories on their menu. "Each place gets 1 bottle," she said. "They can't reorder for 90 days. It's not scarcity for marketing, it's scarcity for meaning." Franklin nodded. He liked her. She spoke plain. Didn't try to charm or sell, just told the truth. "What if nobody bites?" he asked. Nina gave a small shrug. "Then you've still bottled the best story no one ever drank." Ghost hopped into the truck bed like he understood the mission. Eli slapped the tailgate shut and looked to Franklin. "You sure you don't want to be the one to drop the first bottle?" Franklin shook his head. "This place, this still, it ain't just where the whiskey came from. It's where it belongs. I leave now, I'm afraid the ghosts won't let me back in." Eli smiled. "Suit yourself." The truck rattled down the mountain road, tires kicking up frost and memory. Franklin watched until it disappeared into the trees. Then he turned to Nina. "You ever wonder if some things are too good for the world?" She didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the valley. "I think the world's only broken because we keep hiding the best parts of ourselves." "This," she tapped the neck of the remaining bottle. "This is a piece of your soul, Franklin. And maybe that's exactly what the world needs right now." He took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right. Let's see if they listen." The next few days passed slow, like time itself was respecting the aging process. Franklin spent most of it in the cellar, cleaning, checking the still sketching out improvements with a pencil stub on the back of old receipts. He'd started writing in his grandfather's journal, too, filling the blank pages with his own thoughts, his own reckoning. At night, he and Ghost would sit on the porch with one of the prototype bottles, sipping small pours like communion. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. By the end of the week, word came back. Asheville had noticed. The bartender at the Copper Widow called first. Said a local spirits blogger came in, tried a half-ounce pour, then ordered a second just to confirm it wasn't a fluke. By the end of the night, he was asking questions. Who made this? Where's it from? Can I get more? 2 days later, the blogger's write-up hit the web. He called it the rarest spirit east of Kentucky, praised its quiet strength, and compared it to hearing a veteran tell a story with no need to exaggerate. The name Ghost's Reserve lit up social media. A few food writers picked it up. Then a minor celebrity chef posted a photo with a glass and the caption, "This isn't whiskey, this is soul fire." Franklin didn't own a smartphone, but Nina showed him the article printouts. He read them at the kitchen table, expression unreadable. Ghost rested his chin on Franklin's boot, eyes half-lidded. "Well, boy," Franklin muttered, "they're listening." He didn't smile. Not yet. Then came the knock. Late afternoon, soft light filtering through the windows, fire popping in the stove. Franklin opened the door and froze. Max stood on the porch, wearing a tailored coat, leather gloves, and a face like he wasn't used to being the one showing up uninvited. Franklin crossed his arms. "Took you longer than I thought." Max blinked. "You expected me. Whiskey moves faster than guilt," Franklin said. "But guilt always catches up." Max stepped inside, glanced around the cabin like he'd just stepped into a memory he wasn't ready for. "You're trending," he said. Franklin raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment or a diagnosis?" "I had a call from a distributor in Nashville. Asked if I knew anything about a mystery label coming out of the Appalachians. Said they're getting requests from New York and L.A. Franklin shrugged. "Ain't mine to sell." Max frowned. "Come on, Dad. This is a gold mine. You've got Provenance Legacy Craft, the whole artisan story everyone's begging for. If we move now, I can scale this. I've got the connections, legal marketing, bottling. This could change your life." Franklin leaned forward slowly. "Son, I didn't come up here to change my life. I came up here to find what was left of it." Max stared at him, confused. "You don't want success, I want meaning." The silence between them stretched tight. Max rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, look. What if we compromise limited run? Keep it small boutique. You still control the process." Franklin narrowed his eyes. "And who controls the name?" Max hesitated. "Well, I assumed no. You assumed wrong." Franklin stood. "This ain't your brand, Max. It's your inheritance, and not in the way you think." Max's mouth tightened. "You're throwing away real money." Franklin turned toward the window. "Money doesn't remember your mother's laugh, or the smell of sawdust in my daddy's barn, or the sound of rain hitting a tin roof while you pray your mash doesn't scorch." He looked back. "But this does." Max didn't reply. Just looked down, shook his head, and left without another word. Franklin watched him go. For the first time, there was no rage in his chest. Just clarity. That night, Nina returned with news. A boutique retailer in Charleston wanted 6 bottles. A bar in Chicago had offered to fly someone up the mountain just to shake Franklin's hand. And an anonymous philanthropist had donated funds for a short documentary, a story about whiskey healing and history. She handed Franklin the first bottle sale receipt. He held it in his calloused hands, stared at the signature. "Well," he muttered, "looks like the ghosts are paying rent now." Ghost barked softly from the hearth. Franklin smiled just barely. Then he walked over to the journal and wrote one sentence at the bottom of the latest page. "The world finally tasted what we buried in silence." The knock on the door came just after sunrise, soft but deliberate. 3 even taps, like the person on the other side knew Franklin was already awake. He was. He always was these days. Franklin had been sitting at the kitchen table wrapping labels in wax paper, his coffee gone cold beside him. Ghost looked up, first ears twitching, then let out a single low bark before trotting to the door. Franklin opened it, expecting Eli or maybe Nina, but it was Clara, his middle child, the one who never yelled, never fought, the quiet one, the one he thought might never come back. She stood there in a raincoat damp from the drive auburn hair, tied back a small duffel bag at her feet. Her face was tired pale, but her eyes were sharp, so sharp they cut straight through him. "Hi, Dad," she said. Franklin didn't move at first. His voice, when it came, was low and dry. "I was wondering which one of you'd come next." Clara gave a tired smile. "It's not about the whiskey." He stared at her a second longer, then stepped aside. "Come in, then," he muttered, "before the ghosts change their minds." Ghost circled her once, gave a soft snuff, then settled back down near the hearth, like he already knew she wasn't here for a fight. Clara walked into the cabin and stopped in the middle of the room, hands in her coat pockets, eyes scanning the space like she was trying to remember it from some far-off dream. "It's smaller than I remember," she said. "You were smaller too." She turned, smiled faintly again, then looked down. "I saw Max." Franklin sat. "Let me guess, he's mad." "Wounded," she corrected. "He says you've gone rogue. Max wants to bottle control more than whiskey." Clara pulled a chair and sat across from him. "And you don't. I want peace," Franklin said, voice flat. "Peace doesn't come in shipments." She looked around. "Then why are you bottling anything at all?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Then he said, "Because it's not about the whiskey anymore. It's about what was buried with it." Clara nodded slowly. "I figured that's why you stayed." Silence stretched between them. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This is why I came." Franklin eyed it, then took it slowly. The seal was already broken. Inside, a legal document, a trust amendment, a new proposal for ownership split on the family property and the rights to the Cole legacy. He skimmed it. His jaw clenched. "Jacob drafted this?" he asked. Clara nodded. "And Max, he doesn't know yet." Franklin set the papers down carefully, like they might explode. "So Jacob wants a piece now, too." "He's not asking for a piece," she said. "He's offering one." Franklin narrowed his eyes. "What's the catch?" Clara took a deep breath. "He wants you to name the whiskey after Grandpa." Franklin blinked. "Joseph Cole, hell no. Not instead of Ghost's Reserve. Under it. A tribute line. Joseph's Fire. He thinks it could expand the story, add historical weight." Franklin stood abruptly, pacing toward the hearth. "That man doesn't give a damn about legacy," he snapped. "He wants a headline." Clara remained calm. "Maybe. Or maybe he wants something to fix what we all broke." Franklin turned. "You really believe that I believe," she said carefully, "that we're all looking for ways to rewrite our ending?" He looked at her a long time, and something in him shifted. "You used to hate this place," he said. She nodded. "I hated the silence." He stepped closer. "And now I miss it," she whispered. "Every day." That cracked something deep in his chest. Not pain, not regret. Just the fragile echo of a door opening that had been closed for far too long. They sat again this time, both quieter. Franklin reached for the journal, his grandfather's, now filled with pages of his own handwriting. He placed it in front of Clara. "Read it," he said. "Then tell me if this should be turned into a marketing pitch." She flipped it open, fingers brushing the old yellowed pages. Her eyes scanned slowly, absorbing her great-grandfather's words. The stills, the trials, the pride, the fear of loss, the reverence for the land. She didn't speak for 10 minutes. When she did, her voice was hoarse. "This isn't a product. It's scripture." Franklin nodded. And it's his scripture, she added softly. Not yours. That hit him hard. He leaned back in his chair. That's still down there, he built it. But he wasn't the one who kept it breathing after the war. That was my dad. And then me. Every man in this line added to the story. So maybe it's time for a woman to write a page too, Clara said gently. Franklin looked at her. And for the first time in 20 years, he saw her not as the daughter who left or the child who never called back. He saw her as someone who'd inherited the silence and finally found the courage to speak into it. He stood, walked to the counter, and took the last bottle from the crate. The sixth, untouched, sealed tight. He handed it to her. This one's yours. Clara's eyes watered. What am I supposed to do with it? Carry it, he said. Protect it. Share it when the story's ready. But not before. She cradled it carefully. Then from her coat pocket she pulled something else, an old photo. Worn creased at the edges. Martha standing on the porch, laughing. Clara was maybe 6. Franklin stood behind them, caught mid-laugh. She placed it on the table beside the journal. I want to help tell the story, she said. Franklin nodded. Then you start by staying. Later that evening, Nina returned, eyes wide. We just got an offer, she said out of breath. A collector from Atlanta wants a private tasting. He's offering 10 grand just to sit in the room with a barrel. Franklin looked at Clara, then at the journal, then at Ghost. He stood slowly. Tell him no, he said. Nina blinked. No, Franklin's voice was steady. You don't sell your soul to the highest bidder. You wait for the one who recognizes the voice inside it. The storm rolled in just before dusk, quiet and slow, not the kind that screamed warning, but the kind that whispered something's coming. Franklin stood on the porch, watching the clouds creep in over the ridge like bruises blooming across the sky. The air was thick, heavy. Behind him, voices echoed from inside the cabin. Clara was helping Nina set up for the tasting event, rearranging the furniture and laying out hand-printed cards with tasting notes. A small, curated group of guests was due to arrive within the hour. Chefs, writers, collectors. People with influence. People who could carry the story of Ghost's Reserve beyond the mountain. Franklin wasn't sure that was a good thing. He rubbed a hand down his face and muttered, We're inviting strangers into a sacred place. Let's hope they remember how to be guests. Behind him, the door creaked open. Clara stepped out holding 2 short glasses of the reserve. Thought you might need one, she said. He took the glass, raised it slightly. To what? She smiled faintly. To not screwing this up. They clinked glasses, sipped in silence. You ever feel like a thief in your own life? Franklin asked suddenly. Clara tilted her head. You mean like you're just borrowing it from someone better? He nodded. She thought a moment. I think we all feel that way when we're standing too close to the things we love. Inside, Nina called out. They're here, Franklin's stomach dropped. He turned to Clara. Let's see what the world wants from us. They moved back inside just as the first knock hit the door. Nina opened it, greeting the guests with the smoothness of someone who had done this 100 times before. Franklin, on the other hand, stayed near the fireplace, watching from a distance. There were 6 guests in all. A food critic from Savannah, a sommelier from New York, a Charleston chef, a whiskey historian from Kentucky, and a couple from California who ran a boutique spirits shop. They looked out of place in the cabin, expensive boots on pine floors, curated beards, and tailored coats brushing against weather-worn walls. But they were respectful. curious, awed by the surroundings. Nina ushered them in and began her speech. "You're here because you've heard whispers. Ghost's Reserve is not just a whiskey, it's a legacy hidden in the bones of these mountains. Tonight, you're not just tasting a spirit. You're tasting memory." She gestured toward Franklin. "This is Franklin Cole, veteran distiller caretaker of the Cole legacy. None of this happens without him." Franklin cleared his throat. "I didn't make this whiskey. I just listened to it." There was a pause. Then the critic laughed quietly. "Hell of a quote." Nina began pouring samples, careful not to spill a drop. The glasses moved from hand to hand, and soon the room filled with soft murmurs, words like caramel, smoke, river stone, velvet heat, and clean finish. The historian took a sip, closed his eyes, and said, "It's as if the barrels remembered the war and forgave it." Franklin didn't know what that meant, but it sounded respectful enough. Then the man from California spoke. "How much are you bottling right now?" Franklin's jaw tensed. 6. Total. The man's eyes widened. 6 bottles. You're sitting on a fortune and capping it at 6. Franklin didn't answer, but Clara stepped in. "This isn't about money. It's about message." He nodded toward her. "Let her carry the fire now." But let's be honest, the woman beside the man said message only matters if people hear it. That's when it started the slow creep of ambition into the room. The chef chimed in, suggesting partnerships. The critic offered a national feature. The sommelier spoke of exclusivity deals and private allocations. One by one, their admiration turned to calculation. Franklin felt the shift like a knife pressed against his ribs. He stepped forward. "You all think this is a brand. It's not. It's a burial site." The room went quiet. He pointed to the floor. "Right beneath us is a cellar where my grandfather hid what he couldn't legally share, and where I found what I didn't know I needed to survive. That whiskey saved me, not because it's good, but because it made me remember." No one spoke, not even Clara. Franklin turned toward the door. "If any of you came here for a story, you can control you're in the wrong hollow." But before he could ask anyone to leave, Ghost growled a deep, guttural sound, low and warning. They all turned. Outside the window, 2 sets of headlights cut through the storm, bouncing over the dirt road. Franklin narrowed his eyes. That's not Nina's list. The trucks rolled to a stop. Doors slammed. Voices angry, too loud, cut through the rain. Max and Jacob. They burst through the door without knocking. Max looked wired, damp hair plastered to his forehead. Jacob was calmer, but his suit was too clean for these hills, and that made Franklin's blood rise. "What the hell are you doing?" Max shouted, his eyes scanning the room. "Tastings, secret releases. You think you can cut us out of our own inheritance?" Franklin stepped forward, body tense. "I did cut you out, because neither of you earned your way back in." Jacob raised a hand. "Easy. We're not here to fight. You brought your lawyer last time," Clara snapped. "This time it's fists." Max looked around at the guests. "This is the story, the tortured vet with the secret stash. You think that's going to hold when the IRS shows up asking where the first 10 barrels went?" Franklin's voice dropped low. "Don't test the stillness, boy. You might not like what breaks loose." Jacob stepped forward, more composed. "We're offering a buy-in. Clean cut. 50% of the brand shared equity. You keep operations. We scale distribution. We protect the family." Clara laughed bitterly. "You want to protect the family now?" Jacob met her gaze. "I never stopped trying." Franklin moved to stand between them. He looked at his guests, then at his children. "I told you once," he said quietly, "if it leaves this mountain before it's ready, it won't come back the same." Max pointed toward the table. "Too late for that. You already let it go." Franklin clenched his fists. Nina stepped in, calm but firm. "This isn't the time. Or the place." Jacob looked at her, then back to Franklin. "We'll be back. With papers." Franklin nodded. "I'll be waiting." With something heavier. As the brothers stormed out, the storm outside cracked with thunder. Ghost stood in the doorway, unmoving. Franklin turned to the guests. "You still want to drink something holy?" No one answered, but none of them left. He poured a final round. Not for the market, not for a feature, but for memory. The town of Harmony Creek hadn't changed much since Franklin last stepped foot in it, which is to say it had changed in all the ways that didn't matter. New storefronts with old bones, fresh paint on tired wood. A coffee shop now stood where the barber shop once buzzed. But the looks were the same, and so was the silence that followed him down Main Street. Clara walked beside him, holding the flyer for the evening tasting, "One Night Only a Spirit Returns," featuring Ghost's Reserve. Beneath that was Nina's delicate script, crafted in the mountains, poured with purpose. Franklin glanced at the poster taped to the window of a hardware store that still had his father's name faded across the bricks. "Used to be when we walked this street, people nodded." Clara kept her eyes forward. "Now they whisper." He snorted. "Guess that's what happens when you bottle ghosts." The tasting was being held in the back room of Marlin's General, a space once used for town meetings, now occasionally rented out for yoga classes and baby showers. Nina had transformed it, though. Candles in mason jars, Appalachian folk playing soft on a speaker, a long table of hand-sanded wood, set with 8 glasses per guest each, with tasting notes and a single name, Cole. They arrived 2 hours before the guests. Eli was already there, sleeves rolled, unloading crates. "Town smells nervous," he muttered. "Like it knows a secret's about to be told." Franklin gave a dry laugh. "It ain't a secret if everyone already heard it, Eli. It's just a wound no one dressed." Nina came out from the back holding a clipboard. "We have 18 confirmed. Local press, a few food writers, Sheriff Martin, even the pastor." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "Reverend Halley." She nodded. He said, "If Jesus could turn water to wine, maybe Franklin Cole can turn pain into purpose." He wasn't sure whether to be honored or insulted. Guests began arriving just before sunset. They came in cautiously, like entering hallowed ground. Some gave polite nods to Franklin. Others avoided his eyes. Sheriff Martin shook his hand firm and unreadable. "Heard a lot about this bottle. Even more about the man behind it." Franklin replied, "One of those is probably true." As people took their seats, Clara moved through the room with quiet confidence, pouring measured ounces of the reserve, describing its notes, oak smoke time. Eli kept the rhythm with stories, Joseph Cole's Still the Hidden Cellar, the legacy unearthed by a dog who wouldn't stop digging. And finally, Franklin stood. The room quieted. He looked at the faces, skeptical, curious, some old enough to remember him as a boy. He raised his glass. "They say the mountains keep what they're given. Buried it might be, but never gone. This whiskey ain't about proving anything. It's about remembering everything." He drank. So did they. A hush fell over the room. Not reverent, not awkward. Just still. Then someone clapped. Then another. and another. And then the storm came. Not outside, but through the front door. Max and Jacob, again. Max was red-faced, his voice already raised. "This is theft." The crowd shifted. Some stood. Franklin stayed calm. "Evening, boys. Careful you're spilling more than anger." Jacob stepped forward holding up a folded paper. "Cease and desist. Filed this morning. You don't stop production and sales immediately, we file for injunction." Eli stepped in. "You serve that here, you better be ready for the town to read it." Max turned to the crowd. "You think this is noble? It's exploitation. He left his family behind, and now he wants your praise. He abandoned us." Franklin's voice was low, but it cut through the room. "No, I failed you, and I'm trying to earn back something money can't buy." He stepped forward. "But you, Max, you're not angry because I left. You're angry because you weren't here when the healing started." Max froze. Clara stood too, her voice firm. "This isn't about shares. It's about story. And some stories aren't yours to tell." The pastor stood, raising his glass. "Let the dead bury the dead. Tonight let the living taste what was once lost." The crowd clapped again. Max dropped the paper. Jacob picked it up. They left without another word. Franklin poured himself a second glass. He didn't drink it, just held it up. "That paper, that's not what haunts me. What haunts me is the day I forgot my family was made of people, not expectations." The silence that followed was different now. Not heavy, just real. After the tasting, people stayed, talked, shared stories, laughed. The pastor asked for a second pour. Sheriff Martin said he'd be honored to carry a bottle in the station. As the room emptied, Clara helped clean. She turned to her father. "You think it worked?" Franklin smiled softly. "Maybe." He looked at the bottle, at the label. "But sometimes healing don't start until the first crack." The mountain was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet Franklin had worked so hard to earn. This silence buzzed with something underneath, the kind that doesn't come from peace but from expectation. Since the tasting in Harmony Creek Ghosts Reserve had become more than a whisper, it was now a name floating across state lines, popping up in food blogs, whispered in kitchens, and poured quietly at chefs' tables. Franklin didn't own a smartphone, but Clara kept showing him things, photos, praise, invitations. Some glowing article had called it Appalachia's liquid memory. He didn't know whether to laugh or board up the windows. That morning, a Range Rover had made it halfway up the muddy trail before its driver gave up and hiked the last quarter mile to the cabin. The man wore trail shoes that had never seen a trail and a Patagonia jacket cleaner than spring water. "Mr. Cole," he said, offering a hand Franklin didn't take. "Jack Fallon, VP of Acquisitions, Monarch Spirits. I believe we spoke to your daughter." Franklin nodded slowly. "You climbed a hell of a mountain for a meeting that won't end the way you think." Fallon smiled like it didn't matter. "We want to license Ghosts Reserve. Nationwide distribution, full support, state-of-the-art facilities. You'll still oversee quality, of course. Think of it as preservation." Franklin turned and shouted, "Clara Company!" She came out wiping her hands on a dish towel, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Fallon. "You said you weren't coming till next week," she said. "We expedited. This is important." She shot a look to her father. Franklin said nothing, just stepped back and let her take the lead. Inside, Fallon laid out a clean packet, all tabbed and highlighted. Licensing agreements, brand identity expansions, tasting room plans, exclusive runs, influencer campaigns. It felt surgical, like they weren't pitching whiskey, but buying out a soul. "We can guarantee national reach within 6 months," Fallon said. "Your story resonates, Mr. Cole. People want this. They need it." Franklin finally spoke. "People don't need whiskey." "Maybe not," Fallon said. "But they need connection. They need heritage. That's what you're really selling here." Clara crossed her arms. "We're not selling anything. We're sharing. That's different." Fallon smiled like he pitied her. Franklin leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. "Let me ask you something, son. You ever spend the night in a place with no signal, no neighbors, and a dog that growls at shadows he doesn't trust?" Fallon blinked. "I can't say that I have." "Then you don't get this whiskey. You don't get me. And you sure as hell don't get to bottle what you don't understand." Fallon started to respond, but stopped. He looked at Clara, then back at Franklin. Collected his papers. "You think you're protecting something," he said on his way out, "but sometimes a story grows stronger when it's shared." Franklin watched him disappear down the hill. Later that night, Eli joined them by the fire, sipping one of the last remaining pours of the original batch. "You gonna tell him no, officially?" Eli asked. Franklin stared into the flames. "He ain't the first to think buying the bottle means owning the man. Might be the last if we're not careful." Clara sat across from them, journal in her lap. She looked up. "We could do it our way. Small batch, seasonal, limited runs. Tell the story ourselves. No middlemen." "And when the orders stack higher than our barrels," Franklin asked, "you ready to choose who drinks and who don't?" "Maybe the point ain't the size," Eli said. "Maybe it's the silence it leaves behind." Franklin looked between them. "We carved this from memory and guilt. If we give it away, we lose the control to say what it means." Clara added quietly, "But if we keep it too close, it dies in our hands." Nobody spoke after that. That night, Franklin walked the path back to the cellar alone. Ghost followed, close ears perked. The trapdoor creaked open. He lit a lantern and descended slowly, boots echoing off stone and dust. He stared at the racks, the barrels, the handwritten notes in Joseph Cole's journal pinned to the walls. He remembered being 10, watching his father pray over the mash like it was sacrament. He whispered aloud, not sure to who, "It ain't about keeping the world out. It's about letting it in slow enough not to drown us." Ghost let out a low huff. Back upstairs, Clara was still awake, waiting. "We can build it," Franklin said. "On our terms, but no strangers in this house." She nodded. "We can start small, online allocations, invite-only tastings. We use what we need. Keep the rest buried." He looked at her and smiled just barely. "If the world wants a drink," he said, "they better bring more than a wallet. They better bring a reason." The morning fog rolled thick over the mountain, blanketing the trees like breath held too long. Franklin stood at the edge of the cabin porch, watching Ghost disappear and reappear between the swirling mist like some kind of spirit come to life. Inside, Clara's voice carried softly, measured, thoughtful tense. She was on the phone with the journalist. Franklin had told her she didn't have to do it, but she'd insisted. If we don't shape the story, she'd said, someone else will turn it into something we won't even recognize. So she'd agreed to a feature interview, national profile, legacy and heritage, and the rise of Ghost's Reserve. The reporter, Lila James, was coming in from Asheville that morning. Nina arranged it all, checked her credentials twice. But even Nina couldn't screen for intent. Franklin didn't like it. Too exposed. Too soon. And yet, it was Clara's call. "Don't give them anything you can't take back," he had said. Now he wasn't sure if she heard him. By the time Lila arrived, the fog had lifted, revealing the cabin in sharp focus, a storybook of old woodstone and soul. She stepped out of a dusty Subaru with a leather satchel and a recorder already in hand. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, sharper tone. "Clara Cole?" she asked. Clara met her at the fence, extending a hand. "Welcome to Cold Hollow." Lila glanced around. "This place looks like a postcard with secrets." Clara smiled. "That's not far off." They sat at the long table on the porch, Ghost resting near Clara's feet like a sentinel. Franklin stayed back, stacking firewood just close enough to listen without appearing to. The interview started easy. "How did the reserve begin? What inspired the relaunch? What's it like working with your father after all those years apart?" Clara answered gracefully. Calm, confident. But then came the turn. So Lila said, flipping a page in her notes, "Your father's military service, he served in Fallujah." "Correct," Clara blinked. "That's right. There's mention of trauma. I've spoken to a few people, Harmony Creek locals, a former CO. There were rumors about an incident, civilian casualties, cover-ups. Was that part of why he left the service and went dark for all those years?" The question hit like a trap door swinging open. Franklin dropped the log in his hands. Clara sat straighter. "That's not relevant to the story." Lila leaned in, eyes sharp. "But it's central to the man, isn't it? This whiskey was born out of isolation, guilt, healing. If we're going to understand Ghost's reserve, we need to understand the ghost." Clara looked at her quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "Some stories aren't yours to tell." Lila didn't flinch. "Then tell it yourself, or someone else will." Inside the cabin, Franklin poured a glass, not for the journalist, not for himself, just to hold. He'd always known the past would find him. He just never expected it to show up with a press badge and a fact-checker. He walked out onto the porch. "If you want answers," he said, "ask me." Clara turned. "You don't have to." Franklin raised a hand gently. "It's all right." Lila hit record again. "What happened out there, Mr. Cole?" He sat slowly. "In Fallujah, we kicked in doors without knowing what was behind them. One night we went in hot on bad intel. There were women, a boy. He had something in his hands, looked like a device. My unit didn't hesitate. I did." Clara closed her eyes. Franklin's voice cracked. I yelled to stop. Too late. Turned out it was a metal toy truck. I picked it up from the rubble after. Carried it in my pocket for 2 tours. Still have it in the cellar. Next to the first bottle I pulled from the dirt. Lila's voice dropped. "That's why you built this place," No Franklin said. "I built this place so I could learn to breathe without hearing his mother scream in my head." Clara reached out, placed a hand over his. "That boy never left me," he said. "So I made a home he might have felt safe in. One that listened." The wind moved through the trees like breath released. Lila turned off the recorder. "I won't publish that," she said after a moment. "Not without your consent." Franklin nodded. "Then you're better than most." Lila stood. "Thank you. For the truth." She didn't ask to taste the whiskey. She didn't take any photos. She just walked back to her car and drove away. After she was gone, Clara sat with him in the silence. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "You weren't supposed to. Why now?" "Because if the world's gonna drink what I made to survive, they should know what I was surviving from." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. The glass sat untouched on the table. Later that night, Nina arrived with news. "You need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. It showed a post already shared 1,000 times. Lila James. "Some spirits aren't meant to be sold. They're meant to be remembered." Franklin looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the cellar door. "It's time we showed them what else we've been keeping buried." The fog returned the morning the film crew arrived. It curled around the pine trees and draped itself over the ridge like a curtain waiting to be pulled back. Clara said it felt like a good omen. Franklin wasn't so sure. He stood at the cabin's front porch with Ghost at his side, watching the caravan of 2 SUVs and a rusty production van labor up the dirt road. Nina hopped out first, clipboard in hand, hair tied up like she meant business, which she always did. 3 cameras, 2 sound ops, 1 director, and a kid fresh out of NYU who thinks he's Scorsese, she whispered with a smirk. Franklin grunted. "You promise they'll listen. You gave your condition. They shoot what you allow and nothing more." They agreed. He still wasn't sure why he'd agreed. Maybe it was Lila's words echoing in his head. Maybe it was the look Clara had given him after he'd told the story of Fallujah. Or maybe he was tired of hiding things that were already bleeding through the floorboards. The director, a man named Cyrus Ray, had a presence about him. Not loud, not pushy, just intense. Everything about him was trimmed to purpose, his beard, his words, even his footsteps. "Mr. Cole," he said, shaking Franklin's hand with both of his. "This is your house. We follow your rules. My job's to capture truth, not manipulate it." Franklin gave a skeptical glance but nodded. "Then follow me." They began in the woods. Franklin led them down the trail to the stream past the old tree, with initials carved by someone long dead. He talked about growing up here, about his father's obsession with silence, and how Ghost dug up the truth buried beneath years of rot and memory. Cameras rolled as he walked them to the trapdoor. "I never opened this with strangers around," he said. "But I guess if the ghosts don't mind, neither should I." The cellar creaked open like it always did with protest. They descended, lanterns flickering off the stone walls. The film crew fell quiet. One of the cameramen whispered, "This is like a chapel." Franklin didn't correct him. They filmed the barrels, the dusty bottles, the old photographs pinned to a support beam, Joseph Cole smiling Franklin as a boy, and one blurry Polaroid of a man in uniform holding a dog that looked an awful lot like Ghost. Franklin stood in front of a single barrel with no label. The wood was darker, as if it had aged differently. "This one was never meant to be poured," he said. Clara and Nina exchanged glances. Cyrus asked gently, "Why not?" Franklin stared at it. "Because it was made the night I came home from the war. I didn't plan it. I just needed to make something. Anything. Put the rage somewhere it wouldn't hurt anyone." He ran a hand along the barrel. "I never bottled it. Never tasted it. Didn't want to know what guilt tastes like." Cyrus took a step back, giving the moment its space. Then Franklin turned to the team. "You can film everything else, but this barrel stays closed. No B-roll, no inserts, not even a frame." "Understood." Everyone nodded. Back upstairs, they set up interviews. Clara spoke about the first batch, the digging, the fights, the hope. Eli gave his half-smiling grunts about stubbornness and legacy. Nina laid out the business decisions and why choosing slow overscale wasn't a weakness, but a stance. Finally, Franklin sat alone. Cyrus positioned the light gently like it might spook something. "If you could say one thing to the people who drink Ghost's Reserve," he asked, "what would it be?" Franklin didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands. Then finally he said, "This ain't a drink. It's a confession in a bottle." No one said a word for a while after that. They wrapped just before sunset. The crew packed up quietly, as if speaking loud might undo something sacred. Cyrus approached Franklin one last time. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't just give us footage. You gave us meaning." Franklin replied, "Make sure that means something to whoever watches." As they drove off, the fog began to creep back in. Inside, Clara sat with the journal on her lap. "You think it was worth it?" Franklin took his seat near the fire. "Depends on what they do with it." Nina came in holding her phone. "Cyrus sent a teaser already. Just 30 seconds. Want to see?" He hesitated. Clara hit play before he could say no. The screen showed the seller silent. Then Franklin's voice, "This ain't a drink. It's a confession in a bottle." Then a shot of Ghost by the fire. Fade to black. Clara looked at him. "It's not just whiskey anymore. It's testimony." He nodded. "And we just swore it on camera." The cars came slowly at first. 1 or 2 a day. Curious couples from Asheville, old-timers from Kentucky, war vets with their grandkids in tow. They didn't knock. They just stood by the fence, eyes on the cabin, unsure if they were welcome or trespassing. Franklin watched them from the porch. Some waved. Some just stood still like they were waiting for the land to speak. "They're not coming for the whiskey," Clara said one morning, handing him a coffee. "They're coming for what it gave back to you." He sipped without answering. The sun hadn't broken over the ridge yet, but the valley was glowing. Then one day, a man got out of his truck and walked straight up to the steps. He was maybe 50, lean but weathered. He wore an old Marine jacket that had seen real dust. Franklin stood. "You Franklin Cole?" "Yeah." The man held out his hand. Franklin took it. "I was with Echo Company. Ramadi. Not Fallujah, but close enough to know what it did to a man." Franklin nodded. "You carry ghosts too. Every day." The man looked around. His eyes landed on Ghost, then the cabin, then the faint outline of the cellar door. "I saw your story. The doc. Didn't come for a bottle. Came to say, you weren't alone. None of us were." Franklin swallowed. That lump in his throat that had never fully gone away returned with weight. "You want to come in?" The man nodded. They sat by the fire. No whiskey between them. Just time. By the end of the week, more followed. A mother who'd lost her son in Afghanistan. A woman whose father drank himself to death, but left a journal full of poetry. A young vet who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, but sat on the porch for hours in silence next to Ghost. The land turned into something else. Not a distillery. Not a museum. Something in between. Something sacred. Clara called it the Hollow. Eli started running workshops, woodwork, cooking, storytelling. Nina coordinated visits by appointment. Nothing commercial. Just intentional. The whiskey became symbolic. Poured rarely. Gifted, not sold. Franklin only opened a bottle if he felt the person needed it more than he did. Most didn't ask. They just sat. Shared. Exhaled. Then one morning a letter arrived. No return address. Just a single name on the envelope, Jonas. Inside a folded photo. A boy holding a metal toy truck, smiling. On the back, he was my cousin. I didn't know the story until now. I thought I hated you, but now I just see a man who never stopped mourning. Thank you for carrying what we couldn't. Franklin held it for a long time. That night he walked to the cellar. Ghost followed, tail low. He opened the trapdoor, lit the lantern, descended slowly. He stood before the unmarked barrel, the one he'd sworn never to open, the one built with more pain than oak. He rested both hands on it. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," he said aloud. Then he tapped it. The cork came loose with a quiet pop. He poured one glass, walked it outside, set it down on the porch railing. Clara, Nina, and Eli joined him. Wordlessly, they watched as the wind swept gently through the trees, as if someone unseen had finally been given permission to breathe again. Franklin raised the glass. To the forgotten, and those who remember. He drank. It was smoky, sharp, salted with memory, and it didn't burn. Later that evening, Franklin stood by the stream with Clara. "You think it ever ends?" she asked. "What the wait? The stories, the ghosts?" He thought about it, listened to the water. "No," he said, "but it changes shape. First it haunts you, then it humbles you. Then, if you let it, it heals you." She nodded. They turned back toward the cabin, lights glowing soft through the windows, Ghost barking once at the dark, then quiet again. In the silence, the mountain no longer felt heavy. It felt held.